Yo, what is up? Will here with Canyon Fantasy Basketball Flock. We are back and we're talking about some top 10 Dynasty rookie rankings. I know a lot of the content has been redraft focused. We're going to be doing the redraft content, but we're starting up some Dynasty content as well. And if you don't play Dynasty, I want to highly recommend that you at least give it a check out, see if maybe you can get a group of friends together to play or find a group to play with in the Fantasy Flock Discord. Fantasy Dynasty basketball is so fun for so many reasons. Obviously, the long-term game, like feeling like you're managing a team from a long-term perspective. And I think also like deeper benches, deeper starting spots, a lot of these prospects that we're going to talk about end up mattering a lot for, not as much for redraft, right? If you think about how many rookies end up actually mattering year to year in their rookie year, it's not a ton. But a lot of these prospects, like hitting on these prospects is a massive value swing for a Dynasty league because obviously you're having these guys long term. So with all that set aside, real quick, if you guys aren't on Underdog, use code Canyon, 100% deposit match up to $100. We're going to be doing some best ball Underdog drafts for the basketball season. They also have individual player prop contests. We're getting into the NFL season as well. Looking forward to that. So use code Canyon if you are an Underdog. But with all that aside, let's get into it. We are back, and the number one Dynasty rookie, it's got to be obvious. I don't feel like we need to spend a ton of time on this, but Victor Wembanyama. I mean, obviously, we can give you all the reasons why this prospect that's been talked about for so long is the number one Dynasty player. I think from a redraft perspective, it's really interesting to talk about where he'll go, but I think he already kind of cements himself in both points and categories, depending on how you feel about him from a minutes perspective and, ability to stay healthy, blah, 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 whatever you'll talk about. He's going to give you elite defensive stats from a blocks perspective. Would not surprise me at all if he leads the league in blocks if he's playing starter minutes. Obviously, the scoring can be there, the rebounding numbers. Is there anything else to add about Wemby here, Canyon?
No, my little note, my synopsis here says, don't need to waste energy on a synopsis here. So I don't have much to add here. I mean, especially with Dynasty, it's, you're taking the most talented player for one, but you're also taking the guy that's a generational talent. He's going to play a lot of minutes. He's going to change a franchise. He's going to be the Spurs guy for a long time. So it's obviously like you're going to get a guy that's going to be impactful right away. And then on top of that, he's obviously like the generational talent. So we don't have to go too much into that.
Yeah, and real quick before we move on to number two, I think the more interesting point with Wemby is where you stack him up with a Dynasty startup, like where he's going against current NBA players. And I think from a Dynasty perspective, I think it's hard to argue that he's not automatically a first round startup pick, if not arguably, is he the number one? Should he be the number one pick in a Dynasty startup just with the youth and the production you're expecting, not just in the rookie season, but long term? I think that's a difficult question, obviously depending on build, but I think he could easily, if he hits, he is the first overall pick, right? But I think that's the more interesting conversation with Wemby. But obviously, we're just talking about in terms of compared to other rookies. We'll probably do some more content in the future looking at, these rookies compared to others and just kind of overall Dynasty values. But I think that's a more interesting conversation before we get into number two.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if I'd put him at one overall. I mean, there's still a lot of young guys that are super good that are going to be playing for several years. So I don't know. I don't want to overreact to like what we saw in the Summer League or the health thing. So a lot of it's just kind of, yeah, that is definitely a different conversation. But yeah, he's obviously up there if you do an entire Dynasty redraft with all the other guys in there too.
For sure. Number two here, we've got Scoot Henderson. This was my number two prospect. I think Scoot should have gone second overall, in my opinion, whatever, as a fantasy basketball player, not a GM or anything or a scout. But I think Scoot, just from a talent perspective, obviously the big question with Scoot for this year specifically is the Dame situation. If Dame gets traded, obviously you expect Scoot to start, play a ton of minutes. I think we've seen, not just in the G League, but we got to see it in Summer League a little bit. Obviously, the injury and, him not playing as much was a little unfortunate. Obviously, nothing long-term there. But Scoot, I think, is just, I don't know how to talk about this. The motor, man, he's got the ability. I really think that from a fantasy production standpoint, year one, if Dame is not there, would not surprise me at all if he's putting up, kind of redraft numbers similar to like, just like think about like what Anthony did in that role compared to Dame and what he was able to do. And you remove a guy like Dame from that and Scoot can step into that role. I do want to set this up before we start talking about the rest of these prospects, and I'll hand it over to you, Katie. I think that for rookies, there's a lot of excitement for these like top, even just these lottery picks, but a lot of these top picks, there's a lot of excitement for the production they'll give you in the first year. But I will say it is very rare to have multiple rookies immediately play starter minutes for teams even as like top 5 picks. That does not happen like super, super common. If you just think back to last season, right? Like Banchero, Jabari Smith, obviously Jaden Ivey, but a lot of that had to do with, obviously the Pistons injuries with Cade and everything. A lot of these guys were kind of pushed into starter minutes roles. But outside of that, from a lottery pick perspective, a lot of those guys that even performed well, like a Ben Mathurin, wasn't even a starter for the full season. It was a lot of rotation minutes that ended up equating to starter minutes. So it's not super common that these guys will immediately first year be impact players. So picking the right prospects, and from a dynasty perspective, I think there's a big value shift and bump in who's able to produce in that first year. So obviously a Scoot with no Dame is one of those guys that could see, massive bumps in comparison values to the other guys, depending on what that Dame situation looks like.
Yeah, I think, I kind of talked about it with Wemby a little bit, but like talent is obviously super important, but honestly where they go is just as important because of usage and projected minutes. And like you said, especially for the first couple of years, talent-wise, if a guy's a top 10 prospect and he, plays to his potential, like eventually he'll get those minutes. But yeah, like you said, like where they go definitely makes a difference. But for Scoot at 2, I totally agree. I have Scoot at 2 as well in the draft and in Dynasty. I think he should have gone 2. You explained it well. The knock on him was like the 3-point shooting, I think a little bit. Shot under 30% for the G League last year, but that's something you can you can get better at. You can't like get better or teach like the motor and the the passion and the playmaking. Like I was very impressed with his playmaking in that short stint that we saw from the one summer league game that he had. The stuff, the intangibles he has, but like the 3-point shooting, like you can work on that. So I love him at 2.
Immediate, especially if Dame's not there, the immediate impact he should have in the points and assist department, so especially in that role for the Blazers, I think is massive just in the first year. And then obviously we're talking about these guys from a dynasty perspective long term. Moving on, I'm going to talk about 3 and 4 here, these next 2 guys. We've got the Thompson twins. So for me, I have Amen and then Asar. It's really tough for me to distinguish. We are Pistons fans. I really wanted to put Asar ahead of Amen. I was a little more impressed from Amen. I do think that there is a conversation to be had, especially about the first year and probably the first couple years for these 2 guys. If you just look at the Rockets roster versus the Pistons, a lot more crowded, especially the first year for Amen. It's really hard to find a situation where he's going to play starter minutes. I think Asar probably won't start for the Pistons. I think he should, but it would not surprise me at all if midseason Asar is starting for the Pistons and Amen is still not. I think Amen will still play solid rotational minutes for the Rockets. I think he has the talent. Both of these guys have the athleticism. You talk about elite defenders. Those are big things for rookies playing and getting starter minutes, or at least solid rotational minutes in the NBA, is the ability to just hold your own defensively and be a smart enough offensive player. You don't even need to be an elite scorer to get solid minutes in your rookie year. If you're a smart offensive player, you can find that role. And I think both of these players have shown that and showed that in the Summer League as well. I had the opportunity to go to Vegas and watch some Summer League games. Got to watch Asar specifically. Obviously, you want to catch those Pistons games. Just the decision making. Both of these guys are just great basketball players. And that sounds corny, but if you really think about it and watch their game, very few times are they making the incorrect read or the incorrect decision. And that's really interesting to think about, talking about the 2 OTE twins. I think that was like a big, these guys, the talent they played against, is it going to equate? Man, I have no questions at all. Watching Summer League, getting to watch these prospects, I think both of these guys are elite athletes, are like top athletes automatically heading into the NBA. And then you talk about, great feel for the game. You talk about the defensive upside from a fantasy perspective, one they can give you. I think these guys are long-term solid NBA players. I think the scoring and the shooting is going to be the big questions from these guys. But it was pretty promising. And obviously from a rookie perspective, if we're having these long-term, neither of these guys even need to be great shooters to give you great production from a fantasy perspective. That's why I have them 3 and 4 here.
Yeah, I agree with all those points you brought up, the athleticism, the super high IQ. It is going to be interesting to see how they start in rotations for both of them. Like I said, I do think Asar will end up starting for the Pistons. I think Amen will also end up starting. I think he should. I like him alongside Jalen Green, honestly. But yeah, I think maybe they'll feel it out and end up starting midway through the season, if not earlier. But I actually have them lower. I have Brandon Miller at 3, not to spoil who you've got coming up here, but in this list. But I actually personally have Brandon Miller at 3. In fantasy, scoring points can be the moneymaker, right? And Brandon Miller, from what I assume, is just going to be a shot chucker. He's going to put up a lot of shots. He can score at all three levels, inside out. He's got a great 3-point shot. Positional versatility as well, offensively, defensively. He can move well. He's a big guy. He's a long guy. He's got a good wingspan. So I like his frame, his potential defensively. The rebounding might not be insane, but at Charlotte, I think he's going to be a guy to look to that can easily get up there in field goal attempts sooner rather than later. So from a fantasy perspective, I like him more, just his ceiling with the points specifically to kind of back him up there. And then defensively, I think he can be kind of a menace and help you out there fantasy-wise as well. But I get it. I get the Thompson Twins being over him, but just fantasy-wise, I just like the idea of like Brandon Miller could be a 22 to 26 points per game guy. Like that's why they drafted him so high, right? Like that's his ceiling. So that kind of carries a lot of weight in fantasy if you can put up over 20 points per game, especially in today's NBA. That's not too much to ask for from a guy with such a high ceiling and high talent like him. So I have him 3, Thompson Twins just under. That's pretty much why, just the scoring. But obviously Thompson Twins, the intangibles, the rebounding, the passing, the defense, they're going to be right up there with him.
Yeah, I think I've got one big pushback for me on Miller is obviously you talked about the shot checking a little bit. I mean, I think he is a better scorer and shooter than he showed in the Summer League. So I'm not going to say, I do want to preface this. Summer League should be, you can check some boxes and take a look at things, maybe preconceived notions you had about players and kind of see how that stacks up in the Summer League versus, college, OT, G League, wherever these guys played. I don't think it should be a massive rank changer. And that's not what happened here with Brandon Miller for me. I think he's a better scorer, better shooter than he showed in Summer League. He did have some solid games as well. So, obviously we got to see a little bit of that. He was a, good 3-point shooter, high on a high volume, 38%, 7.5 attempts per game. Free throw percent shooting as well. Great scorer, like all three levels. I think the thing for me is, and we'll talk about this about some other guys who maybe didn't make this list, is when I think about long-term fantasy production. So this is the first thing I'm talking about. Long-term fantasy production. What Brandon Miller needs to be as an NBA player, I think he has to hit this like high, he's an elite scorer in the NBA to give the kind of fantasy value that you would need to draft him at 3. And for me, I think the Thompson Twins, I think their floor is so high because they don't need to be these great scorers. Like defensively, they can get it to you. They're great players. I think the assist and the rebounding numbers specifically for these guys, I was really impressed in the Summer League with the rebounding, especially from Asar. In just those situations. I'm going to push back a little bit on, I think it'll be interesting to see what Charlotte's roster shakes out to look like, especially for the next couple of years. But it would not surprise me at all if this team, if Miller is, really not that, potentially second, even third option, and he's kind of the fourth option offensively early on, just with what that team could look like. If we talk about like obviously LaMelo, talk about Terry, I know we don't want to talk about Bridges, but there's a world where we look at Charlotte's roster and early on, Brandon Miller isn't getting the opportunity to showcase the scoring and, have the kind of shooting volume you need for him to be really effective from a fantasy perspective. And if that's the case, he's going to fall down these rookie ranks if Asar starts, like you talked about, and Amen as well. So I think that's kind of the big thing for me. I don't want to call Brandon Miller a shot chucker. Okay. I think he can be a great scorer in the NBA, but that's why I have him at 5 instead of 3-4 with the Thompson Twins.
Yeah. Honestly, that would surprise me. If he's the fourth scoring option and they take him over Scoot, like what are we doing here? Like they took him over Scoot, right? You could have had Scoot, who would be a 2-3 option for sure. He's super talented. Like you took Brandon Miller over, you better use him. I know Michael Jordan just dipped out of Charlotte, but like you got to use that guy. So I would be very surprised, but
yeah,
I hear you.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it's locked in. It's kind of the only thing I want to say. So I think early on we might not see what a lot of people are expecting out of Miller being taken second overall there. But with all that aside, we'll get into number 6 here. I have Taylor Hendrix. Obviously, you talk about Summer League. Didn't get to see, a lot of, of Taylor Hendrix versus a lot of these other prospects. But man, the shot blocking and the shooting ability for his side, if you're talking for his size, if you're talking about category leagues, I think really interesting. And then just overall, just fantasy production and just a points league as well. I think what Hendrix can be in the NBA is very, what he gives you is something you can easily correlate to fantasy production. And I think if you talk about a lot of these guys that you'll mention later in this list, you talk about like a Grady Dick or even a Cam Whitmore, you have to kind of find these high ceiling situations where they are solid fantasy producers. And I don't have to do that with Taylor Hendrix. I think he is going to equate for fantasy production, maybe not immediately, but I think there's a situation, especially with that roster, that Hendrix, can do what he's been great at in college and have that equate for fantasy. So I do like Hendrix a lot long term.
Yeah, I've got him at 6'2". This is another classic example of where he went and why he went there. And obviously he's got the talent, but he's drafted by Danny Ainge. Danny Ainge knows how to draft. We've seen that in Boston for a long time. So I'd put my eggs in that basket along with him to put Hendrix up there. One of the best pure shooters in the draft. Just like you said, maybe not going to be super impactful right away, but he is at a good team to kind of find himself a good slot there to be productive. And again, I'll trust Danny Ainge in his drafting skills for sure.
Definitely. I'll move on to 7 here with Jairus Walker. Below Hendrix here. It's going to be, so obviously I really quickly want to mention, he had that procedure to remove some loose bodies in his right elbow. I think that's not been super common in the NBA. I saw some fantasy doctors, read some reports on that, and I think like it's a really high success rate, so I'm not no concerns about that, and that's not the reason he's lower on here, obviously, especially for Dynasty. But I do want to mention, I think in the summer league, obviously defensively, I think Walker can look solid. He can definitely give you some. I think he can provide solid defensive numbers, when he does get those starter minutes and is playing solid. I think offensively he was a little inconsistent, but we saw some promising things. It was obviously difficult in summer league too, when you're watching that. What he was asked to do in a lot of the situations when he was playing, he's not going to be asked to do, offensively for the Pacers when he plays. And, you talk about Obi Toppin there as well. I think it's difficult to find a situation where he is going to be like this like starter, massive minutes immediately. I do like him a lot though, and I think he does have a lot of upside. And obviously offensive inconsistency is something that you're going to see from every rookie, regardless of if it's Wemby at 1 or Jairus Walker at 7 here. So I think that's not something I want to move him down too much for, but like Hendrix a little bit more. But I do really like Walker, and I think he is long-term NBA solid player.
Yeah, I'm one spot lower on Walker than you. I love his frame, honestly, the most. He's 6'7", but has a 7'3" wingspan. He's got a good IQ. He finds the space. Like he moves very well off ball. He knows where to find himself on the floor, where to position himself. He's got a big NBA body, big grown man body for how young he is. And honestly, I think in Indiana, I don't hate the fit. Even though they did bring in guys like Obi Toppin and other people, I still think there's a good room to kind of nudge his way into some solid minutes eventually, but definitely not a guy that's going to be super impactful right away. But I like his ability to kind of be his own man and put some presence in the NBA as a young guy with his body and his IQ off the ball. So I do like him. I have him one slot lower, and then I'll talk about who I have at 7 here, because I think we have it flipped here.
Yep. 8 here, I've got Anthony Black, and we were, fully honest. If you guys were watching the NBA live stream when the pick happened, we were kind of poo-pooing it a little bit. I like Anthony Black, but I think my biggest question on him was, his ability, his shot and his scoring ability. Obviously, he's big, can defend, solid NBA player, so understood the pick. But man, he showed that he could do that in the summer league. Now, once again, I feel like I wanted to say this 4 times in the video. We don't want to overhype summer league. So if you see clips and you're like, man, Anthony Black's got some Kyrie handles, stop. He is playing in the summer league, but dude can ball. So I think he cemented himself in the top 10 for me, getting to see that. I think the situation with Orlando is, interesting if you just look at the youth they have and what that's going to look like long term for him. But I do think, once again, when you talk about these rookies who can defend and have that size, especially with Orlando, I think he definitely could cement a solid role and long term. It definitely increased his stock getting to watch him in summer league and kind of these reports kind of leading into the season.
Yeah, I mean, taking him at 6, they obviously trust him a lot. So I'd imagine he'd find a good role pretty early on. If not, he should be probably a starter right away. I mean, they have a lot of guards there, obviously, but Anthony Black's the newest capital that's coming in, so you got to use him. And yeah, just like you, that's kind of why I put him up at 7. I was really impressed. I did like his defense, his body, his playmaking, his ability to see the court. It's a great thing you want, but in the NBA, it's such a high-scoring league right now. You got to be able to score, and I was very not on board with him like that. And, like you talked about, but yes, it's summer league. But I mean, he not only did he score, but like his footwork was very good. His shot selection was very good. He pulled some things out of his bag. I was like, I didn't know he could do that. He's not going to step out and shoot and knock down a bunch of threes. Still, I'm not very high on him for outside perimeter shooting at all. But his footwork was very good down low, and he's obviously got the big frame to kind of hang around the big guys down there. So I was, albeit summer league, I was enough impressed to kind of bump him up one.
Definitely. And I know we mentioned it a couple times and not wanting Summer League to impact player rankings too much. And I'm going to have to talk my way through this one because I know this is probably more of a hot take, and I'm going to get some pushback from the second side of this video we're recording here. But I've got Chiante George, and I know this is probably the biggest riser from Summer League just in terms of expectations. Honestly, for me, expectations heading into young, obviously 19 years old. His shooting splits and his assist numbers were okay in college, but obviously we got to see great in summer league. I think that the shots improved. I think the biggest thing for me with George isn't even necessarily his performance in the summer league, but I think in the situation he's in currently, I think he's got a chance to play solid minutes this first season. Now, obviously, it's hard and you don't want to put too much stock in that. So if you don't believe in these prospects and you don't want to put too much weight in your opinion that they may play good minutes the first year, but that's kind of where I'm leaning. And I think he's one of those guys. So I will kind of preface this. I love Dynasty for many reasons. One of them is the stock market aspect of player values and being able to trade and move players based off of, perception. So Chiante George is one of those guys where if I had to hold on to these assets, talking about these players as assets, if I had to hold on to it forever, Chiante George would not be at 9 for me. I would have him much lower. Not much lower, but he would be outside of my top 10 for sure. Probably closer to kind of, 12, 13, 14. But I think that there's an opportunity, especially with what we saw in the summer league, the hype from there. I think he has a chance to play. I think he can be a solid scorer and assist guy. And I think if we see that in the first year, or at least the first couple years, which I think he has that opportunity if you just kind of look at that roster, I think that there's going to be some opportunity to be able to, flip and move him for other assets. Just if you look at, man, this is 6'4", 19-year-old who's, scoring like this already. Man, think about this. We've got, Jordan Clarkson, but better. That's kind of the mindset we're going to be hearing from people. So that's just kind of my flag plant. Because I do think even after Chiante George, there's a lot of guys who probably won't produce a ton in the first season. So I think he's kind of my flag of, compared to other guys, you talk about Bilal, we've got Cam Whitmore, Grady Dick, a lot of these guys people are excited about. I think from a first-year production standpoint, I kind of have more faith in Chiante George having an opportunity and a situation to do that than a lot of these others.
Yeah, I'm glad you prefaced it with, if you have to stick with these guys for the entirety of their career, it's going to be a lot different, right? Because that's not what this is all about, right? It's about value and, being able to make trades and change things up in the future. So that's a good point to make. I agree. I think he is. There's always good scoring guards near the end of lotteries, right? Just try Donovan Mitchell's, Kobe Bryant's, Devin Booker's. There's always guys, but down there that shine and come through and find their spot, and I think he's got a good chance to be that. He's got a good spot. He's pretty raw still, but I like him as a scoring guard where he's at in the Jazz, and I kind of compare it to maybe a Jalen Duren in the fact that Jalen Duren was very raw. He surprised a lot of people in summer league. Maybe he can get a spot, played behind a couple guys, super young, and he's kind of starting to flourish. And right now, Jalen Duren would probably be a pretty high-value guy if you started Dynasty and took him wherever you took him whenever the draft happened. But I see the same thing as a guard version for Chiante George. He's pretty raw, but he can be pretty impactful, and he's very, very obviously talented. In the Jazz, there is, it's kind of a good position for him. That team right now is kind of all over the place. They're semi-rebuilding, and he can definitely find himself getting slotted in there, and all of a sudden in a year or two he's starting, he's playing a ton of minutes, he's showing how well he can score, and he's only 21 years old at that point. So it's a kind of a volatile play here at 9, but like you said, maybe it's a 2 or 3 year move here to get him in there and wait till he has that starting gig or can get a lot of minutes in there and show that he can just be a raw scorer. And the assist numbers too aren't to be scoffed at either for him. I think he has that ability as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know if you want to jump in and talk. I know you probably would have George under a couple people here. I think if we were holding these assets forever, if you told me that I was in a league where I wasn't allowed to trade or talk through trades at all, I think this guy would definitely be higher, just especially from the raw aspect of, I think it's more of a longer term hold and play with Bilal. I just think, you talk about what he's able to do, and you just think like long term, just with his size, his rawness. I think he's one of those prospects where, man, 3-4 years from now, we could be looking back and being like, man, where did this guy come from? I think a lot of people are going to be doing that. I think he definitely has that opportunity, especially if you look at that roster and kind of some recent moves. There might be more of a situation and upside for him to kind of showcase that earlier if the staff deems him ready to kind of provide that consistently. But I know you definitely have a lot of excitement about this guy and just kind of his upside, especially in a dynasty format, if you want to talk through that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, Bilal can impact the game in literally any way. I know it's kind of trendy to hop on Bilal here, but it's also kind of, there is empirical evidence to get behind a guy who's had a crazy growth spurt and has an NBA body and has a high IQ. It's like Giannis, right? I mean, Giannis is a bit way more under the radar. No one expected that, but people analyze kids like this for their lives, and so there's a reason there's a trend behind this kid. Wemby's teammate, very good defensively, and now it's like, all of a sudden he has an NBA body to go with it. Just boosted him up the draft boards because he was very good when he was undersized, and now he can just kind of hang around the guys if he can put some weight on. Very, very much a high ceiling play for Dynasty. He probably won't start. He probably won't play a ton right away, but definitely super young. It's very, very raw, but just the immense upside has to keep him at 10, and the position he's in with Washington, there's just a lot of opportunity to find himself in a role there. Shout out Denny Avdia, though. I love him. Hope he does well next year. But Coulibaly could just definitely be the guy in like 2 or 3 years if he bulks up and people are like, oh yeah, where'd this guy come from? Everybody was right. Like, he played with Wemby. He's like, okay, he's super long. He can defend. He can score. He can pass. He has really high IQ. It's just one of those classic kind of under the radar European finds that kind of comes into his own, hits potential, and hits his kind of peak at the right time, I guess. So I get people being like, this guy's just, has no competition at his size for, like Wemby was kind of the showrunner there, and at the what was the Metropolitan 92s? I can't remember the name of it right now off the top of my head, but Wemby was the guy there. But Coulibaly has what he needs physically, the things that you just can't give someone. You can't make someone become 6 inches taller in game, like, and all this different stuff. But he has the length, he has the height, and you can help the fact that you can put on weight. You can help the fact that you can work hard in the gym and get into solidify yourself a spot. And then once he's just on the floor, bigger body, long, high IQ, that usually tends to do well in the NBA. So
yeah, I know we're approaching the longest recorded video, just getting excited talking about this Dynasty stuff. So we'll just quickly go through some of these kind of honorable mentions, just misses out, or just guys I know that, we'll probably see in the comments. Real quick, let us know, go down to the comments, maybe even before I talk about these, let us know who were those guys for you that you thought should be in this top 10 from a Dynasty perspective. I mean, talk about, guys like Derek Lively, who I do like a lot. I do think that is a guy who, a couple years from now, we could see, him having that starter role. We talk about Cam Whitmore, the Summer League MVP, probably definitely was not the best player in Summer League, but it's hard to argue against the scoring ability he was able to show. A lot of those defensive stats too were carried by that like monster steal game he had, but he had very good, defensive stat and steal numbers in college too. I think he's one of those guys, even more so than Amen, that I think rookie year, hard for me to find more than, 15 minutes for this guy from like a rotational standpoint. It's just hard to put that out, but I know a lot of hype and excitement around him. So, I mean, he's one of those guys where, all he needs is finds his way to have one great game and people are going to be all over him. Oh, it's the next Jaylen Brown. I have some concerns and worries about his ability as like an NBA player to pass the ball and just be like a solid, but you talk about the scoring and the defensive ability as well. Hard to get against that. Grady Dick is one of those guys I know people will talk about. I think like you talk about like guys like Christian Braun, and just like, for me, it's similar to Brandon Miller from my perspective, but even more so that what Grady Dick has to be a like really solid fantasy contributor is such a high, ceiling hit of him being like one of the best shooters. I know he can impact the game other ways, but just we talk about a lot of these other guys. It's a lot easier to equate these to fantasy production and kind of see that correlation happening in the NBA than with a guy like Grady Dick. And then obviously, I just don't want to mention, in case anyone brings it up, we're not talking about Chet. I mean, if you had a rookie draft last season, obviously he was a part of that. I know a lot of people are, pointing him as a rookie because of obviously missing the last season with the injury, but I wanted to call that out. But yeah, let us know who we missed in the comments, who should be in this top 10. Maybe it wasn't even an honorable mention guy we brought up and you want to talk about. I know, Kaden is a Michigan fan. He's got some names. Yeah, he argued for getting in there.
I'll give my little spiel real quick on Kobe Buffkin, okay? I had Kobe Buffkin at 8 before the draft even happened. I love Kobe Buffkin, and just situationally didn't work out. He went to the Hawks. I was thinking maybe if DeJounte got moved, boom, there it is. I just love him as a 3-level scorer. Works really well on and off ball and offense, very focused on defense. But I'm a Michigan fan, but I have watched almost every single game he's played in college. So I like Kobe Buffkin a lot. He would be an honorable mention for me. Just the Atlanta situation is kind of tough, but I'll leave it at that.
Sounds good. We'll close the video on that. Looking forward to the NBA season coming back. We'll get more Dynasty stuff, getting into the redraft rankings positionally and individually, and getting into some underdog drafts, best ball drafts using code Canyon. Appreciate you guys. See you in the next one.